just before I start, so I've got one of my colleagues, James Duff, tuning in tonight. James is a lawyer in our team, and he did all the hard work to put this together. So thank you, James, and I'm sure you'll see the quality of James' work. So what are we talking about tonight? We're talking about remedial building work. What is it? This is in terms of the Design and Building Practitioners Act. So what is remedial building work? What's excluded from the Act? If it's not excluded, what do you have to do? And if you've got some remedial work that you've planned and you come across other work that requires remediation, but it isn't part of your scope, what do you do? What are you required to do? So that's what we're talking about tonight. So let's start with what is remedial building work? Of course, you would expect that you can go straight to the definition in the Act, except there is no definition in the Act of remedial building works. So Fair Trading's tried to give us some guidelines as to what it is. So it's broadly what you'd expect, I suppose: repair, maintenance or upgrades, or defect rectification. But to what kinds of buildings does this apply? It used to be just Class 2 buildings, but now it applies to Class 3 and also Class 9C buildings. And I don't have to tell you guys what those kinds of buildings are. Now, what's excluded? Perhaps this is the better part. What isn't a remedial building work under the Act? So if it's exempt development under the state environmental planning policy, open bracket, exempt and complying development codes, close bracket 2008, then it's not remedial building work that attracts Design and Building Practitioners Act obligations, which include having to have the designs prepared by a registered designer, having a design practitioner sign off on them, having to upload everything to the portal. The other large area that's exempted from the Design and Building Practitioners Act is emergency remedial building works. So what are emergency remedial building works? So broadly, again, it's where you need to take immediate action. There's a danger of damage or risk to health and safety. The impacts are likely to be serious, and the work is necessary to mitigate those impacts. And note the last phrase, until further work can be done. So we're not here talking about fixing everything that needs to be fixed. It's a temporary, an interim solution, if you like. And if those circumstances exist, then the work's excluded from the Design and Building Practitioners Act. Just to expand on that, it won't be an emergency, or they won't be emergency works, if the work is just designed to address the underlying cause, or immediate action isn't necessary, or it's possible to delay the work, or to comply with the Design and Building Practitioners Act before any serious damage or further serious damage is likely to be caused to the building. And surprise, surprise, the obligation falls on the design and building practitioner to determine whether or not it's emergency or not. So it's your responsibility. So let's take a case example, so a case study. So let's have a look at waterproofing. So your waterproofing membrane's damaged. There's a leak into the apartment below. The whole membrane needs to be replaced. This is a very, very familiar situation to most of you. So what's emergency? What's not emergency? Emergency is stopping the leak temporarily or limiting the leak temporarily. It's not the complete removal and replacement of the membrane, which would require the Design and Building Practitioners Act to be observed. So what's not excluded? anything that requires the preparation of a CERD. So what's a CERD or a CERD? I'm not sure how you'd pronounce it. A construction issued regulated design. If it's not excluded, then this is what you've got to do. So you've got to prepare a CERD or a CERD. A construction issued regulated design has to give you sufficient detail to make sure the works comply with the building code. You also need to have plans identifying the location of the work. You've got to have detail specific drawings. You've got to identify where the remedial building work ends and the existing building components start. You've got to have a schedule of materials and products and specifications to describe performance requirements. So it's quite an onerous task to comply if it's not exempt, and you need to have construction issued regulated designs. Okay, so you get on the job, there's some emergency or there's some remedial building work that needs to be done. It's not an emergency, it's planned, so you're in this Design and Building Practitioners Act territory, and you find that when you go on site, you might either have work that needs to be rectified and you find that out before you actually start your work, or you start your work and then you find out there's other work that needs to be done. So for example, you might be doing some work on some stairs and identify that the balcony height's not high enough, so there's additional work that needs to be done. So what do you do? Well, it depends on whether it's discovered before the work commences or after it commences. So if the work is discovered before, or the non-compliance is discovered before the work commences, you've got to identify it. Surprise, surprise, that's not hard. Can you go ahead? You've got to ask yourself the question, can you go ahead with your remedial works without fixing the other non-compliant work? And so you've got to answer that question. You have to tell the building owner about it. So I know this question's come up and been asked of me before. If you're inspecting a building and you're inspecting a particular part of the building and you recognise that there are other non-compliant parts of the building, do you have to tell anyone? Well, the short answer now is yes, you do. You've got to tell the building owner. And you've got to be wary of your own contractual obligations, because if you're not just inspecting, but you're actually doing the scope of works or you're supervising the remedial building work, well, you might be assuming liability for prior existing defects. So you want to be careful about that. And that, of course, leads to a decision as to whether or not your scope of works needs to be altered. And obviously, that's something you're doing before you actually start the work. But what if you start the work and you discover something else that needs to be rectified? Well, again, you've got to think about, can I keep going? And so depending on the answer to that, if you can keep going, you need to reference those non-compliant building components in an amended CERD. So you've got to notify that, again, as part of the notification. You've got to get your construction issued regulated designs and you've got to note them and put in an amended construction issue regulated design. If it is going to impact you doing the building work, the remedial work that you need to do, then you need to stop. You need to get a regulated designer or another regulated building practitioner, registered building practitioner, talk to the owner, work out an amended scope, then lodge an amended CERD, and then go ahead with the work. You might need to do further investigation. Again, you've got to tell the owner what's going on, why it needs to be done, so that they can make an informed decision. If they don't make an informed decision, they might not pay you. So that's very important as well. And it's an offence if you go ahead and do the additional work and it's not reflected in the CERD that has been lodged with through the portal. So that's That is remedial building work, and in brief, the ins and outs where it's covered by the Design and Building Practitioners Act. So now I am up for questions, so I'll just stop sharing for a moment and come back to the meeting for any questions.